If cattle's your business, then today's show is for you. Patrick Linnell with CattleFax is my guest, as we're going to cover several topics that are important to every ranch operation as you look ahead into 2022.
The market just has a different tone to it. That means that, with any market, there's always ups and downs with it, but it really does feel like the tone is turning.
From cattle markets to our national economy and the changing trends in our industry, it's all on today's episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. It is episode 48. We are glad to have you here with us today. I'm your host, Justin Mills, coming to you all the way from the northeast corner of the cowboy state of Wyoming, and we appreciate everyone tuning in across the country here on World Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM, and you'll find us right here every Saturday and Sunday at 12 noon Eastern with our program. And, of course, I know we also have a lot of folks tune in via podcast as well, and if you just search any major podcast provider out there under Working Ranch Radio Show, you will find us. And might also mention, I mentioned this a few weeks ago, you can also find us on YouTube. Now, there's no video with the show, just the audio, but you can listen to it through YouTube as well. Again, search Working Ranch Radio Show. You will find us. Today is episode 48. Well, this past week, I had the opportunity to head to Rapid City, South Dakota for the Range Beef Cow Symposium that was taking place there. It's an event that happens every other year, and it's hosted by the land-grant colleges out of South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Colorado, and it's always a great conference. Enjoyed it this year as well. I'm going to share with you a conversation I had with Patrick Lannell with CattleFax. Is going to be our featured interview today, as he was there to give his presentation on the outlook and what they are forecasting to see for the cattle industry into 2022. And we're going to talk about a lot of different factors that they think are going to influence the cattle markets. And of course, a question I've got is, what about the inflation, the national economy and the inflation? How is that going to have a factor in our cattle markets? That's a question that I asked Patrick, so be sure to join us for that. That's going to be our featured interview today, Patrick Linnell with CattleFax. Speaking of the Range Beef Cow Symposium, it was good to get out and see a lot of folks that I hadn't seen in a lot of years. As I've started with doing this show for the Working Ranch magazine, I've kind of been on the ranch for several years here and not getting out to a lot of different events as much, and so it was kind of good to be on the road a little bit and see a lot of folks that you've heard here on the program that I've interviewed, to folks that I hadn't just seen in several years. So it was good to be out and see that, and enjoyed that conference in Rapid City, South Dakota. Getting back to on our show today, of course, Patrick Linnell, as I just said, with CattleFax, will be our featured interview. The Captain, Tim O'Byrne, will be by in just a moment with this week's edition of Tim's Two Cents, and meteorologist Don Day will be joining us in our final segment today as we take a look at what the long-term weather is going to look like. And again, I am always pushing and I always asking meteorologist Don Day about what's it going to look like for about 2 to 3 months out. Are we going to get moisture this spring? And I know a lot of us are just kind of wanting to have a little more certainty with that, and we're going to try to get as much as we can from meteorologist Don Day. Right now, I do want to thank the sponsors of the Working Ranch Radio Show, the American Simmental Association. And, Simmental is known as the science breed, and the American Simmental Association's Carcass Merit Program, their feed conversion data, and their calving ease research has established Simmental as a beef industry leader that combines growth and carcass value with some very outstanding cow traits. Research that's being backed by some of the most extensively documented genetics and some of the largest multi-breed database in the industry. SimGenetics, profit through science. Find out more at simmental.org. Also, Biozyme, protect and recovery with VitaCharge by Biozyme. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-Charge. charge. Also, Performance Beef. Find Performance Beef online to learn more and request a demo. Also, Hargrove Ranch Insurance, providing pasture, range, and forage insurance to ranchers all across the nation. Give them a call. Hargrove Ranch Insurance at 325-573-8975 and ask for a free custom quote. You can also find them online at hargroveinsurance.com. And finally, it's coming up here Monday before Thanksgiving, November 22nd, Connelly Angus with their fall bull sale. If you'd like to request a catalog or for more information, you can go to ConnellyAngus.com. By the way, do not be afraid, no matter where you are located in the country, do not be afraid to buy a good bull from Connelly Angus. Free wintering, free delivery nationwide. They're out of the Sandhills of Nebraska. Give Jerry, Gabriel, or Jed a call there at Connelly Angus. Again, their sale coming up on Monday, November 22nd. Well, now let's check in with the Captain Tim O'Byrne, publisher and editor of Working Ranch Magazine, for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents.
Hey, Justin, just a few short weeks and everybody's going to be here in Las Vegas, Nevada for the NFR. And we're having our very first Working Ranch Expo December 8th to 10th down at the North Hall of the Las Vegas Convention Center. There's going to be tons to see, a lot of fun, good food, and some great seminar speakers. You could go to workingranchmag.com and you'll find all the information there. Can't wait to see everybody come on down and visit with us. Justin, you're going to be there. I'm going to be there. And but I do have a 2 cents that I want to throw out there. I was just watching the Nebraska Farm Bureau TV show. Great show. And they talked about this looming, well, it's actually a fertilizer shortage kind of coming up here right now. It's kind of a worldwide deal. And I did not know that the United States was, imported a significant amount of their fertilizer. And prices are going up, the shortage is happening, and it's real. So I want you folks to start researching that and thinking about that if you're not already onto it. Fertilizer shortage worldwide. So let's be on top of that, folks. It's Tim's 2 cents. See you in Vegas.
You bet. Thanks, Captain, for that. And yes, that was also something I heard at the Range Beef Cow Symposium, was the fertilizer shortage that's looking like it's coming down. And boy, I tell you what, we all play in the same pool here in the ranching business, so we may not all be much for farmers, but nevertheless, when high fertilizer prices come down the pike, well, feed prices can go up too with that, and so we all kind of play in that same realm together, and so I know that's going to be a factor that we need to be aware of. Well, the other topic, of course, the Captain touched on was the Working Ranch Expo, December 8th, 9th, and 10th in Las Vegas. Yes, I am looking forward to being there as well, and hats off to the Captain and everyone with Working Ranch Magazine that has done a great job of putting this together and trying to get ahead the best they can of some of the unknowns. Whenever you have an event for the first time, you're just kind of working to get things up and going, and they have done a great job of having a good trade show with some very, very phenomenal speakers that will be there each of those 3 days of December 8th through the 10th. And some of the speakers that are going to be there to present are also ones that have been guests right here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Guys like Dallas Mountain with Ranch Management Consultants. He's going to be doing a couple different presentations. Also, meteorologist Don Day will be there, and Lamar Steiger. If you remember back this last winter, we interviewed Lamar about Walmart and their cooperation and work with 44 Farms to supply the beef for their grocery stores. Lamar's going to be there to talk a little bit more about how that's reshaping the beef industry, and so I look forward to visiting with Lamar. Appreciate Behringer Ingelheim for sponsoring Lamar to be there. And speaking of that, Dr. Joe Gillespie with Behringer Ingelheim will be there to talk on parasite control in our livestock, so be sure to look him up. And Lamar, they will be in the Behringer Ingelheim booth. That's going to be booth 241. Again, it's the Working Ranch Expo, December 8th, 9th, and 10th. I'm going to be there. The Captain's going to be there, and we are going to have a great time. Look forward to having you there as well. Well, before we head to break, step into a little bit more of a serious note here. I was on the call with the Captain, Tim O'Byrne, as we were talking about some of the major flooding situations that are taking place up in the northwestern part of the country and into southern Canada. And, all of us have experienced major situations that are weather related. And when that happens, you just hurt for those folks that are having to experience that. And just a shout out and also for you all listening to just keep them in your thoughts and prayers as they are seeing some major devastation due to flooding that's affecting their cropland, their pasture land, any element of their economy that's up there that they're going to have to dig out through this. And what's not going to make it any better is the colder temperatures, and you hit into those northern latitudes up into Canada and the freezing temperatures along with water. Well, I'll tell you, that is not a good combination to kind of climb out of this situation. So just keep those folks up in the northwestern part of the country and into southern Canada in your thoughts and prayers as they work to get through this process of this major devastating flood situation. Well, stay with us. When we come back, we're going to get into our featured interview as Patrick Linnell is going to be joining us with CattleFax as we talk about what they're anticipating and looking at that could affect the cattle markets into 2022. We'll be back with more on the Working Ranch Radio Show. It's a competitive calf market, and buyers want calves that will perform, period. And a proven solution is Simmental. In fact, data from the Tri-County Steer Carcass Futurity from 2002 through 2018 on nearly 60,000 head of calves revealed that Simmental sired calves represented the highest carcass-valued sire group over English and other continental breed groups. And the sire group that was the second highest carcass value was Sim Angus sire. So, the proof's right there. For low-risk, high-potential calves with earning potential, be confident that Sim Genetics will give you more per head, period. Stand strong, Simmental. It's weaning time, one of the biggest days of the year for you and the most stressful for your calves. Ensure a smooth transition with the VitaCharge weaning program. This two-step program with the AmaFirm Advantage gives calves the nutritional boost they need to get through the first weeks of weaning, accelerate appetite, increase weight gain, and improve health. It's weaning time. Get them ready with VitaCharge. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-Charge. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm your host, Justin Mills. Thanks for joining us on our program today as we turn now towards our featured interview today, brought to you by Biozyme, Protect and Recovery with VitaCharge by Biozyme. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-Charge. Well, as I said in our opening today, our featured interview is Patrick Linnell with CattleFax, as I was able to sit down with him recently at the Range Beef Cow Symposium right there in the middle of the trade show after they had after a break and things were a little bit quieter in there, and we talked about what he presented to the folks there at the symposium about what they are looking at, the factors that are going to affect or have affected the industry and that will play out and what we're going to see in the market for us as we look ahead into 2022. So with that, let's turn now towards my conversation with Patrick Linnell with CattleFax. Patrick, thanks for joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Well, as you started your talk here this morning, I thought it was interesting because, as I shared with you before we started our interview here today, it was I think for ranchers out there, we've heard the outlook that it looks like this market is going to get a little bit better, and we're going to talk more about that later on. But at the same time, we're also hearing issues in the economy and the word inflation. So it's looking like we're the highest since 1990, 6.2%, the highest since 1990. So how is that going to play as we look ahead?
Yeah, and I mean, your first point is pretty valid. Yeah, that we've been talking about things getting better for a long time, and I think it's been very frustratingly slow in terms of the tide turning. And I think everybody and their dog thought that the market would be turning sooner than it has, and so it's just been it's worn on people's patience for sure. But we are starting to see that change. We've seen the fed cattle market move $8 higher in 3 weeks. And the market just has a different tone to it. That means that, with any market, there's always ups and downs with it, but it really does feel like the tone is turning. And from a big picture standpoint, like we talked about in the seminar this morning, that cattle supplies are tightening. And, packing capacity and cattle numbers are going to be coming back in line pretty quickly, we believe. So that does leave, upside, for the market.
Sure. With inflation, if it continues to rise, you guys are saying we're going to see these markets, cattle markets, look like they're getting better. If that inflation continues to rise and you say money's not going to be as cheap as it was a few years ago,
right,
what are we going to see those effects from us as ranchers?
Yeah, exactly. And the inflation conversation, is pretty broad based, but it's something, pretty different than what we've been used to in the last few years. Sub 2% inflation. That's not going to be coming back anytime soon in our vision. No, this 6.2% inflation that we saw in October, we don't expect that we'll see those numbers continue, but it still will be something higher than what we've been used to. So, as a cow-calf producer, looking across your business, you can expect that these higher prices will likely continue in terms of input costs. Corn moving higher, so costs of gains are higher. But you look across the feedstuff complex, and all grains are also higher, and obviously hay too as well. And with that, land costs. If you can find the forage, it's expensive. From a cost standpoint, that's going to be something that the producer really needs to watch and monitor for the next few years. Because on the revenue side of the equation, that should be moving up, just in terms of tighter cattle supplies. But we do need to manage the cost side to really capitalize, on that higher revenue. And with that, you bring up a good point about interest rates. We've been pretty well lulled to sleep by money that's essentially free, from a lending standpoint. The Fed's told us that they won't be increasing interest rates until the second half of next year, likely. But if inflation is stronger than what we're expecting and that what other groups are expecting, we could see them start moving interest rates higher sooner than that. But either way, over the next few years, money won't be as cheap as it has been.
Sure,
we won't go back to 12% interest rates or something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
But it won't be 3.5% is probably out of the question.
Yeah. Let's get to the specifics. You mentioned that, just inventory numbers. And that's the conversation that I've had with folks, too, is, just scientifically, numbers-wise, is going to indicate that our markets are going to look better into the next coming year. So let's look at those beef cow numbers, feeder numbers, and then I want to talk about here in just a bit. I'll ask you that about the dairy, something that you talked about with the dairy herd. I want to talk about that a bit. But first, let's talk about the beef cow inventory and what we're seeing there.
Yeah. So, even before we came into the pandemic, we were starting to liquidate the cow herd, just on some constrained profitability, across the board. Returns just not as good as they had been. So we were in this before we hit the pandemic, and that's obviously continued that trend. And then now, in the northern half of the country and in the west, drought has continued that. So we are looking towards tighter cattle supplies. So with that, smaller beef production as well. We're seeing really strong export numbers continue. So moving more beef product off our shores, that's further supportive to price. And then within that, as we get cattle supplies more in line with the shackle space and packing capacity, it leaves room for some more margin realignment, just naturally as you get those things, more balanced. Instead of this world that we've been living in where we have more hooves than we do hooks. Well, as they come more in line, that leaves room for upside potential for the cattle side.
One of the things you talked about is the last high that we saw in the cattle market was very, very extreme. And then we saw a low, that's a cycle. We understand that. But it was pretty extreme on both ends, high and the low. We're going to see that of a dramatic high and low as this market starts to increase.
Yeah, we don't think so at this point. The low that we hit, we probably would have seen a low in 2020 even without the pandemic. And then the pandemic made that substantially worse. But towards the upside on the other side of this, we don't believe at this point that we'll price ourselves out of the market like we did and where we really burned, consumer demand for beef. when both beef supplies and total protein supplies got so tight in 2014. We don't expect that to be the case this time around.
Yeah.
We're not going to contract the cow herd as much, and then there's also more plentiful competing proteins.
Yeah.
So what that means is that we don't have to liquidate so aggressively on the other side of this cattle cycle.
We're going to take a break here in our conversation with Patrick Linnell of CattleFax, as I recently sat down with him at the Range Beef Cow Symposium to talk about his presentation to those that attended the symposium. And when we come back, we're going to jump into a conversation about a trend in the beef industry involving the dairy industry that I was not aware of, and I think it's interesting to hear his perspective on it as we continue when we come back on the Working Ranch Radio Show. There's assurance in buying bulls from a proven program, and a program that's been proven time and time again is Connelly Angus. So mark your calendar now for Connelly Angus Fall Bull Sale, Monday, November 22nd, the Monday before Thanksgiving, offering approximately 350 head of fully guaranteed older bulls with free wintering and free delivery nationwide. These are bulls out of the industry's leading sires with genomic enhanced EPDs. They'll also be offering 6 head of heifer calves. Remote bidding will be available. So for more information or to request a catalog, go to ConnellyAngus.com. It's Connelly Angus Fall Bull Sale, Monday, November 22nd at 12 noon Mountain, the Monday before Thanksgiving. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm your host, Justin Mills, and we're glad to have you here tuning in with us today. By the way, if you want to go back and listen to it, this is episode 48, so that is the way that you can find us there on any podcast provider. This segment is being brought to you today by Performance Beef, and the question is, how do you manage data for your cattle business? You know, you can stop relying on pen and paper or complicated programs, and now you can get real-time access from anywhere with Performance Beef. You can update rations, you can generate real-time closeout reports, record health data right there at the chute, out in the pen or in the pasture, or analyze performance trends, and you can do it all in one place with ease. Your feed, financial, and health information is integrated in one easy-to-use platform, and it's accessible from your computer or your smartphone or your tablet. You can find Performance Beef online to learn more and request a demo. Well, our featured interview today is with Patrick Linnell with CattleFax. I recently sat down with him in the trade show of the Range Beef Cow Symposium in Rapid City, South Dakota, as we talked about his presentation and what he has shared with producers at that meeting. So we rejoin that conversation between Patrick Linnell of CattleFax and myself. You touched on a topic that I hadn't heard of yet, and I think this is interesting. And maybe I've just had my head in the sand here, out working on working on the place here. And that was the dairy industry breeding some to beef bulls to try to get some dual purpose on these cattle. Explain what's going on there.
Yeah, and this is a pretty significant revolution that we've seen in the last few years, where the dairy segment, they're taking their lower half of their cows and breeding them to beef AI sires. And you know, there's been a bit of that going on for years, but the genetics world, they've really honed in on what kind of beef genetics to use that really complement that get a very productive beef producing animal out of that, out of the Holstein native beef cross. And so what you'll ultimately see is, if you sell them as a week old, they're worth maybe $120 more per head, or even for the dairy, they're worth retaining ownership on through the feeding segment, because they're just a more efficient animal than a traditional Holstein steer. We see that revolution could facilitate more long-term growth in the dairy side.
But it's not necessarily, one thing you point out, it's not necessarily an increase in numbers, it's just a change in the genetics.
Exactly. I mean, it's not, that Holstein steer was going to be here either way, but now we've made him a more productive animal. So it'll be interesting, and I think it'll be a benefit in terms of beef demand for the industry as a whole as well. Because if you think about it, one big problem with those Holstein those Holstein steers is irregular shaped ribeyes. Even though they grade well, the shape and things like that from a consumer standpoint, the acceptability isn't quite there. Well, the beef dairy cross, you might give back a little bit in terms of quality, but the uniformity is so much better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to switch directions and let's talk about, because you showed a lot of graphs, a lot of information about just meat products in general. And of course, beef, we got beef, poultry, and pork. And so when we look at that and how as we come out of this time frame, whether you want to look at it as a cattle cycle or even coming out of COVID situation, pork and poultry still pretty stiff competition for beef, but we still have the market share in terms of dollars. So explain that concept a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a pretty stark difference when you look at just pounds of consumption versus market share of consumer dollars. Mm-hmm. Pork and poultry, they sell more tonnage to the consumer than we do. But we actually have a higher percent market share of those dollars. And that's been a trend for a long time, as we're just the higher quality protein of the mix. And so consumers are ready to, if they're going to have a nice night, throw something on the grill, then they turn to beef. Sure. But, over the course of the pandemic, we think we've even more reinforced that because, you've even taken, prime product that would have been at a white tablecloth restaurant. You move that into the retail segment, people got a taste of it, maybe for the first time. So I think that's a benefit that's here to stay.
In my mind, I'm thinking though too, there's kind of a little catch there too, because we, like you said before, we don't want to price ourselves out of the market either. And is there something with that kind of a catch-22?
Exactly, and that ties back to the inflation conversation. As average consumers are looking at their prices that they pay for everything across the board going up, winter heating bills, gasoline, things like that as well. Do they get a little bit more price sensitive to the higher price protein? Mm-hmm. And that is certainly a risk. And especially as we look into early New Year, people are spending so much more for Christmas presents this year. Credit card bills become due early in the new year. There's always potential challenges on the horizon, and things that we need to watch in terms of demand. And those are things that, we're monitoring and are on our radar. But, we do think that, that the consumer really likes our product. And maybe there's some downside to retail prices, but this broader inflationary trend, means that even if it does come down, it probably won't be too significant.
Sure. Want to change directions again now, and let's talk about another big factor in our cattle cycle that was a concern when we had packing plants go offline, and that is hook space. And that looks to be some dynamics of that changing in the industry as well, and that's something you guys are taking into account, is that increased capacity for processing. And so that's going to play a factor as we go forward as well.
Yep. I mean, even pre-pandemic, we had an imbalance in terms of packing capacity versus cattle numbers, and we saw that reflected in leverage and margins. And then the pandemic just made that 1,000 times worse. As we look going forward, there's quite a few announcements of medium to small size facilities opening up over the next few years. Add that on top of regaining some efficiencies in these existing plants, as we hopefully get these labor challenges figured out. Also see more automation and just general efficiencies in these plants, that we could see some more gains on the packing capacity side of things. And we think that that'll be pretty critical going forward too. If we do want to regrow the cow herd and then not run into the same situation in 5 years from now, having too many cattle compared to packing capacity.
Sure. Something that you touched on right there, and I see it. I mean, we hear it across not just the ag industry, but just whether it's even food service industry, but labor is now, I mean, that's a huge deal. And you talk to anybody, I've had interviews with other guests here, and you talk to private business owners, whether it's a fencing company or whether it's, and then you talk about these major processing plants coming online. Labor is a big issue, and it's really becoming way bigger. How do we move past this? How do we make this become kind of a non-issue? Is there a way? Is that the silver bullet, or is that kind of the big question out there?
I mean, it will be it's hard to say, but I would assume that it's a continued trend as far as being a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it'll slowly but surely get better, but I mean, it is a challenge as you think about the fact that people can work, in a fast food segment and make $15, $16 an hour compared to $22, working in a packing plant at irregular hours. Tough work. So that's going to be a continued challenge. We are starting to see where that's getting better, but that was even a challenge, for decades, because those are hard jobs.
Yeah, I was commenting the other day about the fact that kind of maybe this was intended, I don't know, but unintended consequence. I don't know whether you want to view it one way or the other, but with some of the COVID payments that have come to people to not work, has actually brought our labor rates way high, which was where there was a segment of our country that was really pushing for higher minimum wage. We're there. And there's no laws that's saying we got to pay $15 an hour, but that's what it's going to take to even get somebody to walk in the door.
Yeah. I mean, who knows to say whether that's intended or not, but and we don't need to go there.
No, I know,
but I mean, that's certainly been the reality. Yeah. There's been some pretty significant wage increases, because of that, where we had to compete to, pull people back off the sidelines and into the labor force.
Yeah.
And as far as the packing side goes, and probably a lot of other businesses too, with this inflation, we're not going to see those wages come back down.
Let's take a pause right there. My guest today is Patrick Lannell with CattleFax, as we are talking about the things that they're looking ahead into 2022. When we come back, we're going to address the topic on sustainability and how they see that being a factor moving forward for our cattle industry. We'll be back with more on the Working Ranch Radio Show. You're listening to Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. Animal health is key to your business. So how do you track cattle health treatments? Well, stop relying on pen and paper or complicated programs. Performance Beef helps you record processing data, enter costs, and track animal health history all in real time at the chute. The mobile app also makes it easy to log pasture and pen treatments on the go. Your health data is integrated with feed and financial information in one easy-to-use platform, accessible from your computer, smartphone, or tablet. Find Performance Beef online to request a demo. It's the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm your host, Justin Mills. We're glad to have you here with us today, as my featured interview today is with Patrick Lannell of CattleFax. I recently sat down with him in the trade show of the Range Beef Cow Symposium in Rapid City, South Dakota, as we talked about his presentation and some of the things, the factors, the influencers that CattleFax is seeing that are going to be factors in the cattle market for the remainder of this year, and mostly in looking ahead into 2022. Now, the next topic we're going to get into in my conversation with Patrick is in regards to a subject that we've talked about here. In fact, Dr. Kim Stackhouse Lawson was a guest I had a while back on one of our programs as we were talking about sustainability in our industry. And so when we rejoin our conversation, that's where we're going to be going down, and how CattleFax is looking at that and that playing a factor in our beef industry, not necessarily in the near term, but even really a long-term perspective look at the topic of sustainability. Let's rejoin my conversation with Patrick Lannell of CattleFax. One of the things you talked about there a little bit later on was sustainability. Kind of it is a buzzword in the industry right now. I think there's some good things about that. I think there's some things that we need to be very aware of with that. How are you guys looking at that terminology and that element within our beef industry?
Yeah. It seems like over the last few years that sustainability it's been a maturing conversation, and the science seems to be maturing alongside of it. Which is pretty encouraging, I think. Yeah. And we've also seen where there's a ton of money being invested in sustainability. Even if you just look at sustainable investment funds, huge money coming in. And so I think, it may not be there here quite yet, but I think in the coming years there should be quite a few opportunities for cow-calf producers, to engage in that conversation productively, and to be, financially rewarded. And I think there's coming to be a recognition that sustainability practices that work in one area of the country don't work in others, and working with those type of realities. So I think it might end up becoming another revenue channel for producers to to look at implementing some practices that are, at the end of the day, good for the cattle, good for the land, and get financially rewarded for it.
I want to drill down a little deeper on that. When you say practices, and I kind of know what you're talking about, but let's get kind of specific on some of that kind of stuff, because I think there's things that some of these ranchers have been doing already for years, and it's a matter of just capitalizing on what they've been doing. But let's talk about some of those specific practices that you're just kind of aware of here.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to be front center that I'm no expert on that sustainability and those different practices. Things like rotational grazing, places where that works. Just grazing management as far as how you rotate cattle through the rangeland, water usage. Those are the ones that come to mind for me. Okay. And maybe even down the road, it becomes things like, feed supplements or something like that reduce emissions. It's hard to say exactly for me which becomes the most prevalent routes. But I think, we'll learn in the next few years. And I think maybe the conversation or the topic that we're not really going to get into, because neither you nor I are really experts on this, but I just want to kind of topically hit it. But we're talking about carbon offsetting some of these companies. That's kind of what we're talking about a little bit. Is that right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, a Coca-Cola of the world, they may not be able to get towards carbon zero in their own supply chain, but they can do that through buying carbon offsets, or carbon markets, or, who knows what the channel is. The question for me is, do producers need to implement new practices, or can they just verify things that they're already doing? Which blend of the two is it? We'll just have to see. It's pretty new. It's I mean, it's some of it where, like you say, we're just going to have to ease into it with our eyes wide open a little bit. Exactly. I want to get now into just outlook. Yeah, we've talked a little bit about market outlook. Let's talk about in the next maybe 12 to 14, 18 months, and just what are we going to see with the market, specifically the different class types of cattle out there. Right. Starting on the fed cattle side, like I said, we've over the last 3 weeks we've moved cattle $8 per hundredweight higher. Pretty significant move there. We may see ups and downs along the way, but we think the trend will be pretty firmly higher, in through the spring, pushing fed cattle up into the mid, potentially upper 140s. Probably some kind of summer pullback, like we always see, and then taking another leg higher, into the fourth quarter, second half of next year. As we look at that, is there anything that could negatively affect what you guys are? I mean, when you look at everything, you're saying, okay, here's the reasons why we think it's going to go higher, but here's one thing we're watching from a negative standpoint that could really hamper that. Yeah, we are still at a place where if we had some big slaughter hiccups, in terms of, challenges there, we're pretty sensitive to that, if that were to occur. But relative to the fed cattle, there's nothing that we see necessarily on the horizon. Like we talked about beef demand. Yeah. If it really underperforms what we would expect, then maybe. But at this point, we think the trend should be in our favor there. No, relative to calves and feeder cattle, corn, cost of gains, those could be a challenge. We see cost of gains that are significantly higher than what we've been used to for most of the last decade. So it could hold those values down. But we'd look at those prices as, they're higher, but they should be stabilizing. And I know, you're not a meteorologist, but I know with what CattleFax does, you take into account the weather conditions and how that's going to affect our markets as well. And, as we well see, this drought this year was really a large portion of the western half
of the U.S. And so from the weather perspective, topically, are you sensing that this weather's going to give way a little bit and be supportive of these markets?
Yeah, I think so, but just like the cattle markets in general, maybe not as soon as we'd like.
Sure, yeah.
The expectation, the forecast that we watch suggests that as we work through the winter, that we'll have a little bit more average snowfall and precipitation, through the north and northwest. And then as we get into late spring, early summer, we should begin flipping from this La Nina pattern to El Nino, and starting to see that, the more precipitation that comes with that. Hopefully that's sooner than later, to get that spring growth coming.
Well, I know that's a lot of guys that I have talked to, they're really reserved two things: one, weather, and one, the inflation conversation that we had a bit ago. And meteorologist Don Day joined us in our final segment today, and we've always kind of used him on a long-term weather. What you guys are seeing is kind of what he's coinciding, had said as well, that, latter half of the spring to summer, we could start to see that break. What that's going to look like, is it going to be, in my area, we're a 15-inch annual precip. Is that going to be a 20-inch precip this year? Probably not. I mean, it'd be great, but probably not, but at least better than last year.
Yeah, that would be our expectation. And, if you get more average through the winter and, in through the early spring, that helps. But, the reality is it will take a couple years of good rains, I think, to really change this, for places where the groundwater's been depleted.
Yeah. Let's pause here again in my conversation with Patrick Lannell of CattleFax. We're going to come back, and when we do, some good advice he offers as we head into a market that is potentially offering more profitability. Some things to keep in mind. We're going to be back with more on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Coming to the Las Vegas Convention Center, December 8th, 9th, and 10th, it's the Working Ranch Expo, brought to you by Working Ranch Magazine. It's thousands of feet of space filled with the ranch industry's leading equipment manufacturers and suppliers, plus great speakers that will inspire and educate you. And we're in the hall just across from Cowboy Christmas. Register to attend at WorkingRanchExpo.com. It's Working Ranch Expo by day, NFR by night. We'll see you at the Expo. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm your host, Justin Mills. Thanks for joining us here today. Our featured interview has been with Patrick Lannell of CattleFax, as I recently sat down with him in Rapid City, South Dakota, as we were talking about the presentation that he had given to the folks attending the Range Beef Cow Symposium. And if you're just joining our program and you want to go back and listen to it, we've been talking about a lot of different factors and elements that they think are going to be influencers in our cattle market and our beef industry in the next year or so, and even further out than that. This is episode 48, and if you want to go back and listen through our podcast, any podcast provider out there, that is the episode you need to be looking for. As we wrap up our conversation with Patrick, though, some good advice to start it out here as we head into a part of our cattle cycle or our industry that is potentially showing more profitability. Let's turn back to our conversation between myself and Patrick Lannell of CattleFax. As we kind of get ready to close up here, you had a quote that I thought was just perfect. I got to write this down in my mind and practice it. And that was, don't let greed trump profitability. Well, I'll tell you what, we're terrible ranchers sometimes at that. Like, well, I'm holding out for another nickel,
Exactly.
nickel. And so expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah. As we head into this environment of higher prices, we think it's important to give yourself some room and to position yourself to take advantage of those higher price trends. But at the end of the day, we never know when the next black swan event might hit. The next thing that comes out of nowhere and, slaps you in the side of the face.
Yeah.
So waiting for that last nickel versus, hey, I've got a pretty solid profit at these levels. I'm going to walk it in, or I'm going to sell my calves. Doing things like that, I think there's a lot of value in that, maintaining that that perspective. And I think that's where, things like options or LRP, insurance, really play a role in terms of, letting yourself capitalize on these higher markets, but protecting against the who knows factor.
You bet. I find it interesting because when you talk about not being greedy, knowing where your mark is to where you're profitable, and we've had Dallas Mount with Ranch Management Consultants on our show, and I mean, if he's listening to this, he's gonna say we have to know as a rancher, we have to know what our gross margin is on our enterprises. And as I'm sitting here now, I'm thinking I got to get my stuff done, so I know what that point is as I'm marketing calves for 2022, and
right.
We don't know profitability if we really don't know and we're honest with ourselves about what we're putting into these cattle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and if know what your costs are, know where your break evens are, and realize the level of profitability that you might have at a certain level, maybe it makes sense to just give up on that extra dollar and move on and go do something else and know that you've locked in a good profit.
You bet. Well, I want to thank you for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And another thank you to my guest today, Patrick Lannell of CattleFax, sitting down with me at the recent Range Beef Cow Symposium in Rapid City, South Dakota, to share with us here on our program some of the information that he shared with those attending that symposium. Now, I might also mention, speaking of CattleFax, that they're having their 2022 Outlook and Strategies Seminar, and that's coming up real soon. In fact, it's going to be Tuesday, November 30th, 8 to 4 o'clock. Now, there's two ways you can attend that. You can do it in person. It'll be at the Denver Marriott South at Park Meadows, Lone Tree, Colorado, or you can also do it virtually. So if you want to find out more, go to their website, CattleFax.com, and go under the About tab, and you'll find the information to the CattleFax's 2022 Outlook and Strategy Seminar coming up Tuesday, November 30th. Our featured interview today is being brought to you by Biozyme. Protect and recovery with VitaCharge by Biozyme. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-Charge. Well, stay with us. Up next, meteorologist Don Day joins us with a look at our long-term weather. We'll be back with more on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Ranching has been in the Hargrove family for generations, and they know the value of keeping a ranch in the family. Hargrove Ranch Insurance provides pasture, range, and forage insurance to ranchers across the nation. PRF Insurance is a USDA subsidized program that allows ranchers to insure against the risk of below-average rainfall. Hargrove Ranch Insurance utilizes industry-leading custom software to provide the rancher with information they need to stay up to date and educated on their policy throughout the year. Hargrove Ranch Insurance supports ranchers for this generation, the next, and those yet to come. Contact Hargrove Ranch Insurance at 325-573-8975 for a free custom quote or online at hargroveinsurance.com. Welcome back to our final segment here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm your host, Justin Mills, and we turn now to our long-term weather. Today being brought to you by Hargrove Ranch Insurance, providing pasture, range, and forage insurance to ranchers all across the nation. And, you know, our guest today that we had hearing from CattleFax, Patrick Linnell, talking about maybe looking at some risk protection elements that are available through LRP. Well, if you have questions about that, give Hargrove Ranch Insurance a call at 325-573-8975 for a free custom quote, or check them out online at hargroveinsurance.com. Well, we're joined now by meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. Don, thanks for joining us here on our program today.
Thanks for having me.
So I know that one of the things that you have been talking about on your podcast is hoping to get a little bit more clarity as time goes by as to what our long-term weather is going to be looking like. We've seen the three different weather models kind of forecasting three different things. When we're looking at when I'm talking long-term, kind of late November, December weather, and we're seeing some pretty cold weather over the northern cap of the globe, and we're just wondering now where that's going to come and settle at. So what are we starting to see take shape with that?
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, the cold air in those higher northern latitudes is growing, getting deeper, and covering a larger area. And the best analogy is like a dam. The cold air is kind of like the water behind a dam and a reservoir. And eventually what you want to do is you know the dam's going to break, and you know eventually that cold air is going to cut loose. The trick is, when will that happen, and where is that cold air really going to focus in on? And as we go and take a look at the month of November so far, other than the southeastern United States, it's been a pretty mild November, really. And as we get to the end of the month in early December, we're going to see that change, because we're seeing a weather pattern developing out in the North Atlantic that's causing a large area of high pressure to build up. This would be between the North American continent and Europe, stretching up to near Greenland. And what that does is it kind of, we call it a blocking pattern, where if that high pressure stays there for a while, the cold air rotating around the higher latitudes, well, a lot of times it just doesn't have a chance to circulate around the globe. It has two places to go, usually into Europe and then into North America. And this is something that we see potentially developing right at the end of November into early December, which would mean that North America, Canada, and a good part of the central United States can expect a much colder transition once we leave November into early December. From a meteorological standpoint, Justin, our meteorological winter starts in early December. Our meteorological seasons don't necessarily match astronomically like we would in, let's say, the third week of December. So it's about the time when we would expect things to come.
And one of the things that I noticed as with that was, and you just touched on it there a little bit too, it looks like that if this happens, that central U.S., eastern half, really colder than normal. Western half, is it going to be a little average or above normal? Is that what you're seeing? Or did I interpret that wrong?
No, you interpret that correctly. One thing to remember about these really cold air masses that come out of the higher latitudes is cold air, Arctic air especially, is dense, it's heavier. It always goes to the lowest point of gravity. So a lot of times, if the Arctic air isn't deep enough, it cannot get over the Continental Divide. And so what ends up happening, the Great Basin states in the west, the far west, will tend to miss out on these cold waves. But along the east slopes of the Rockies and into the Midwest, sort of the breadbasket, it's like a big basin, and that cold air can easily go in there. It has no resistance from terrain. So there is a tendency for that cold air to want to go down the east slopes of the Rockies into the Midwest and into the Great Lakes. And then the question will be will the direction of the cold be more towards the middle part of the country, the East Coast, or more towards the Rockies? And that's something that we'll have to sort out. We may see all three of those locations at one point or another experience some of that colder air in early December.
Okay. All right. Well, Don, thanks for joining us here on our program today.
Thanks for having me.
And again, that's meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. And you can check out his daily video podcast by going to his website at dayweather.com. And just another reminder, as we talked about earlier in the program when we were talking about the Working Ranch Expo, that's going to be December 8th, 9th, and 10th in Las Vegas. He will be one of the presenters. In fact, his talk will be at 1:30 on December 9th. Today's weather is being brought to you by Hargrove Ranch Insurance, providing pasture, range, and forage insurance to ranchers across the nation. Give them a call at 325-573-8975 for a free custom quote, or check them out online at hargroveinsurance.com. A thank you to our other sponsors as well. The American Simmental Association. We are in the middle of bull buying season, and with Sim Genetics, heterosis works, which is why with Simmental, it's more per head, period. Find out more at simmental.org. Biozyme, protect and recovery with VitaCharge by Biozyme. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-charge. Performance Beef. Find Performance Beef online to learn more and request a demo. And finally, Connelly Angus. Their fall bull sale coming up this Monday before Thanksgiving, November 22nd. You can find out more at ConnellyAngus.com. Now, here's the deal, folks. They deliver nationwide and they winter these bulls. So it doesn't matter where you're at. There's not a good excuse to check it out. Connelly Angus this coming Monday before Thanksgiving with their fall bull sale. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine. If you don't have your subscription, check it out, workingranchmag.com. You can get signed up for one of the nation's leading and most read ranch magazines there is out there. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can do it by calling or texting the studio at 307-363-COWS. My email is justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Well, join us right here every Saturday and Sunday at 12 noon Eastern on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM, or on your podcast provider. Thanks for joining me. I'm your host, Justin Mills. And until next time, keep your chin down, and your mind in the middle. So long.